What's up, Jarrod? Welcome to Dad Edge, my friend. How are you?
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you, man. Interesting story that we started talking about before the recording of this podcast. What you do for a living, obviously, the book that you're working on, but we're talking about dad stuff and a different approach to being a dad and creating an environment of psychological safety and also creating a connection with our kids. I definitely want to get into that, but before we do that, I want you to just share with the men, what is it that you do?
So I work at a mindset gym where we take you through a series of mindset push-ups. This is a Nobel nominated way that teaches you how to think at a higher level. This is important because there's three things happening whenever you're stuck. Whether you're stuck in your relationship with your spouse or your kids or your company, anytime you keep hitting the same obstacles, don't have enough time, don't have enough money, three things are happening. Number one, you are currently doing everything you know to do. Like you're not a slacker, you're working hard. If there's something else you could be doing, you would already be doing it, which means a breakthrough in your situation isn't going to come from trying harder, or it would have by now. Number two, everything you're doing is a good idea. You're no dummy. I mean, this is logical, reasonable, rational stuff, which means a breakthrough in your situation isn't going to come from working smarter, or it would have by now. And so, what's actually going to transform that will at first seem like a bad idea, because if it made sense, you'd already be doing it. And that's the pickle. The brain can't think of what doesn't make sense. So, in my work, we map out your thinking patterns that allows you to get out of the weeds. You can see the whole corn maze. You know exactly what's going to turn that ship around.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Talk about the tests that you do.
So the mind scan, Nobel nominated, came up with Robert Hartman in the 1950s, what he noticed about the way the brain makes sense of the world and how that value, that valuation of what is good and what is bad in the world, how that affects your life experience. For example, if your mind has a high value on taking action, action gets results. Whenever we encounter somebody that has a high value on action, they pride themselves on getting things done. Well, they also tend to have more on their to-do list than they have time to get done. It kind of goes hand in hand, because if your brain values taking action, then it looks for action to take. And this is why you always have more on your to-do list than there is time to get done. Now, other people solve the same problem different, with a different value in play. Instead of doing the work, they have a value of causing the work. So their brain solves problems by building systems to support them and relationships to support them. And this creates more free time to build more systems and relationships. It's just a different way of thinking, if you will, different value. And the mind scan teases out those thinking patterns so we can get somebody out of the weeds, back on the beaten path.
Got it, man. Well, yeah, we're talking to obviously a lot of guys who are entrepreneurs who listen to the show. So that's a quick little teaser of what you do and how you help men. But I know one of the things that you and I talked about before we jumped into today's podcast was something that I'm really, really keen on. And I got to be honest, I don't know if I necessarily agree with how you approach this, but I'm one of those people. I'm not judgmental, and I'm very curious. I'm always curious to learn different ways. So you've got me curious based on the discussion we had before we got started today. If the men have been listening to my podcast for any amount of time, they know that creating an environment of psychological safety where you can have a question, an idea, a vision, or just something that you want to share, or maybe something you just want to get off your chest. My goal around my house is to create an environment of psychological safety where you feel that you're not going to be shamed, judged, or guilted. I didn't say consequence free. I will say that, right? And here's the thing. I battle with the dichotomy of how do I keep an environment of psychological safety where my kid is going to tell me something that they're not so proud of, but they yet feel safe to at least share with me, because I look at this personally as, I mean, I was raised with an iron fist to where, things in my life, if I did something wrong, I was shamed. I was guilted. How dare you? Shame on you. How could you even think such a thing? How could you do such a thing? What is wrong with you? Now take that to a different extreme. Did it teach me boundaries and rules? Yeah, sure. And there's a lot of parents out there that lead with that type of intensity, right? You know, you do not cross this line under any circumstances whatsoever, or there will be hell to pay, right? And that's a bit extreme. I like to think that I strike a balance of a little bit of both. I'm like, okay, come to me with all your baggage, all the things that you've done wrong or anything like that, and let's talk about it. I personally love the effects of natural consequences. I'm a big fan of natural consequences. On the flip side, I also know my kids pretty darn well, and sometimes natural consequences, they either A, might not occur, or B, it doesn't strike the lesson hard enough. Now your approach is a bit different, and I'd love for you to share that.
Caveat, just because this works for my kids doesn't mean it's
Right.
going to work for your kids.
This is the disclaimer, like not all results are the same.
That's right. That's right. Flaw your disclaimer right away. Certainly kids have different needs and different bends. The values at play, I think, are what shift the conversation though. So for example, if my son is driving and gets a speeding ticket, well, that's a natural consequence. Now he can come home and I can shame him and guilt him.
As you should. What's wrong with you?
What's wrong with you?
Better.
You should know better, right? I can should on him, but ultimately, what do I want? Do I want him to feel safe talking to me? He's already paid his price in the real world. Do I want him to feel comfortable? Do I want him to have a desire to share and talk to me? Then in order for that to happen, it's going to be really hard if he is demotivated by hard consequence anytime he shares. For me, this works because he's already paid his price in the real world. He doesn't need to double pay. He's already paid the price.
Now, what if he gets, 5 more speeding tickets over the course of the next 5 weeks?
Well, the real world consequence is you lose your license.
Right.
Now I hear many dads, what about, but, what
I'm going to be devil's advocate on this one.
He hurt somebody. What if he crashes into somebody and he hurts somebody and I could have prevented that by taking away the license for him? Sure. You're welcome to do that. It's just a matter of what is the value at play? Are you attempting to control an unknowable future? Or are you dealing with the cards you're dealt? And of course, every kid is going to respond differently. But that's just an example. And for me, one of the values that tends to come up at play is valuing the long-term quality of the relationship than the short-term.
How old's your son?
The long-term quality of the relationship over the short-term event.
Got it. And how old is your son?
Well, right now he's very young. So he's only 11 and a half. If he was driving cars, there would be serious consequences.
Now, have you you hit that kid with your go-kart again? How could you? Have you had issues with, 9, 10, 11-year-old stuff where you're like, oh, like he did that. And now the natural consequence doesn't necessarily teach the lesson. Have you been across that one yet?
Yes, there was one event that came up. Now his relationship with Mama is very different. She is more of a traditional mindset. Do this because I said so. I shouldn't have to ask you twice. And you can see that even early on, like when they're little, sometimes kids need they need a car ride. It helps them go to sleep. And her mindset was kind of I shouldn't have to put him in a car. He should just go to sleep. And my mindset was like, I get to put him in the car. Like I have a short window of time to get to do this. It'll never happen again. And if I just do it, he goes to sleep and life works. Her mindset was, come here. My mindset was, or I could just go pick him up. No argument. But as that played out, any which way, because she was coming from a worldview of rules and rules are meant to be broken. So he's, pushing back. And of course, the more you talk, the less they listen.
Sure.
So you're just feeding your own system. Any which way, it did come to a head and he did something like really uncharacteristic. This was a couple years ago. Very, very uncharacteristic. And she called me, locked herself in the bathroom. He's a really big kid, really big for his age. But he had motioned towards her in such a threatening way that she was genuinely afraid. And so she calls, locked in the bathroom, like, I don't know what to do. At which point, this is what you were mentioning. What about when there's not an immediate real world consequence? Don't study, get bad grades, have to retake that grade level, speed, get a ticket, pay a fine. This was one of those areas. And so for this area, it was just, okay, here's the deal. It's not okay to ever threaten mama, ever. And if you need to talk about it, we can. If you're not comfortable talking to me about it, I understand. We can talk to a counselor. We can talk to somebody at your school. That's fine. You can talk to whoever you need to talk to. It's not okay to ever cross this line. Now, if you're not willing to talk about it and you cross the line again, then we have these places called military academies that are designed specifically for kids that have trouble threatening their parents. And that's would be the next step. No shame, no guilt, no you should have, no beating. What? Am I going to beat him to show him it's not okay to threaten his mom? Are you
Yeah,
kidding me?
that makes
Might
sense.
doesn't make right.
And as you hit him, you should also be telling him, don't you ever hit anybody.
That's right. I mean, are you kidding me? So what happened was,
yeah, go ahead.
I said, now we don't get to distract from it either. So between now and whenever you're ready to talk about it, it doesn't have to be with me. It doesn't have to be with mama. It can be with counselor. I don't care who. But between now and then, whenever you decide, no distractions, like no TV, no electronics, that kind of thing. Like we don't get to distract from having the conversation of what's going on inside. And
so there are consequences.
The consequence was we don't get to distract.
Right.
You can have the conversation now and we can go back to pleasurable electronics, but you don't get to avoid having the hard conversation by pleasurable electronics.
Okay. I get that, but also tied to, and I hope you don't, I'm challenging you because I'm actually really trying to understand. I actually have a real world issue going on right now that I'd love to bounce off you. And maybe we'll just go in that direction. But what I'm hearing is that, hey, there's natural consequences, right, that are going to happen. But we also can implement natural consequences if I understand that situation correctly. Is that right? Or am I off?
For me, when I hear consequences, I hear like something like, okay, you threaten your mom. This is uncharacteristic. You've never done this before, but you threaten your mom. And so you're grounded for 2 weeks. No electronics for 2 weeks. This is sort of like a penalty for a crime. This situation, just because I have different values in play, I'm concerned about like what was driving him, what was happening inside, what was his thought process, what were the emotions that were coming up. And so we need to talk about this. We need to find out what's going on. Is there something triggering it? Is there a feeling that's coming up? We need to deal with that. And I understand it's scary and uncomfortable to have those conversations, but until we have that conversation, we don't get to go to the amusement park. You don't get to spend your time avoiding it. So, but whenever you're ready, we'll have that conversation. So the value in play was, let's talk about what's going on, not here's the crime, here's the punishment.
Got it. So let me bounce this one off you. I don't punish my kids very often. And maybe that's the difference here. Maybe I'm confusing punishment with consequence. But there are times where I enforce something, especially like if I see something that's not characteristic of the kid, right? Or so in this case, my 13-year-old never had an issue with grades ever. He is one of the, and to be honest, here's my view on grades, whether you buy into it or not, or it's controversial or whatever. As long as he is trying as long as my kids are trying their best, and I know that the work ethic is there and the processes are in place for work ethic, and they're not giving up and they're not lollygagging, and it's, that they're doing the things they need to do to have the result, I'm okay with it. If it's a C, it's a C. That's fine. If it's a B, it's a B. It's great. If it's an A, it's an A. Great. We don't overpraise. For the higher the grades go up, we don't overpraise. It's like, hey, how hard did you work? Like if you got a
Excellent.
D or an F,
Excellent.
yeah. If you got a D or an F, like, hey, did we do everything we could?
Excellent.
And that's how, so like, example of this, like where I wouldn't impose a consequence, right? And actually, these are two maybe examples I'd love to bounce off you. You tell me what you think. So I have an older son that he's 15. School comes a bit harder to him. And he is a C student, B student, and that's fine. He works really hard for those grades. I don't care what he gets in school as long as I see him working. And I always tell him, I'm like, listen, for me, school teaches you work ethic, how to think, how to problem solve. Those are the things. No one's going to ever ask you what you got in freshman algebra ever. Right. Biggest thing is,
Right.
the biggest thing is like when you come home. And he'll come home and be like, hey, I'll be like, hey, what was the most challenging part of your day? And he'll be like, oh, I got a D on the algebra test. And here's my response. I'm not like, what are you thinking? I told you to study. You weren't studying. Like,
That's right.
But I'll say, oh, okay. How do you feel about that? I don't feel very good. Okay, well, let's explore a little bit. Tell me more. Like, what doesn't feel good? And notice I don't use the word why. Tell me what doesn't feel good. It's just, I don't know. I thought I'd do better. Well, based on you thinking you would have done better, what type of prep work did you do that you thought would equal a better grade? And he's like, and then that's usually when I get to the core of like, I really didn't study that hard. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, based on that information, what would you have done if you could wave a magic wand and do this whole thing all over again? What would you do different? I'd probably study more. I probably would have studied, I'd carved out time to study more. Okay, well, great. Well, when's your next test? It's next Friday. Okay. So what do you want to do different? And how can I best support you? And he'll identify what it is, right? Now, I'm not worried about the D because he clearly articulated the lesson. I didn't have to lecture him. He knows what he needs to do next time. No worries. Now, if I see something uncharacteristic, so I'll give you an example. My 13-year-old, never a missing assignment, always decent grades. He's one of those kids I hated when I was younger, where he opens up a book for 5 seconds and he gets an A on the test. I didn't like kids like you. But this year, I've noticed he's got football and he's got a big social life now. Dating a girl, hanging out with friends. Every minute he can, he's hanging out with friends. Well, last night his grades came in 6 missing assignments. And wow. I look at him, I'm like, 6 missing assignments? Since when? And he's like, yeah, there was a lot of blame elsewhere. I was this, the teacher wasn't clear. Okay, well, and I challenged him. I'm like, well, how long have these assignments been missing? Since September 7th. So it's a month. It's a month from where I'm telling you. And I'm like, so when were you not clear? He's like, well, I haven't been clear, since the assignment. I was like, so why, just out of curiosity, tell me what the thought process was around getting more clear or not getting more clear. And he's like, well, I emailed and I did this and I did that and I didn't really get the answers. Okay. So basically, did you do everything that you possibly could? Yeah, I did everything I possibly could. And he clearly did not. Like he was BSing me, right? And he was. I didn't shame or guilt him. I'm like, well, listen, this is pretty uncharacteristic. You have a 62 in this class now. So here's the deal. That's a consequence, right? You have your actions. Here's the other consequence. From now on, for at least until the quarter is ended, we're going to log in together and I'm going to check to see if there's any missing assignments. And if there are no friends until that assignment is done, because clearly there's a priority here that friends and football come before schoolwork. And I'm sorry, that just can't happen. Right. And we identified, I was like, look how much time over the month you've spent with friends when we could have been working on this work. So I did instill a consequence there. And I'm like, listen, you can still be with friends. You can still have that time. But before we do that, I need to see that your work is complete, right? We can have as much fun as we want afterwards and your time is your own, but we need to know that this work is complete. So that's where I guess hearing your story, I battle a little bit with the only natural consequences, because here's the funny thing. Like to him, he was like, yeah, 62 isn't that bad, which blew my mind because he likes A's and B's. And I'm like, yeah, but that was never your standard before.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Something's
So
changed.
I'm interested in hearing your view on that consequences, because here's the funny thing. Like to him, he was like, yeah, 62 isn't that bad, which blew my mind because he likes A's and B's. And I'm like, yeah, but that was never your standard before.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Something's
So
changed.
I'm interested in hearing your view on that.
A lot I would like to share. You used a phrase that I wish everybody knew. And your phrase that you used was, tell me more.
Yeah.
The default response for most people is, what do you mean by that? And if you'll go back through any time somebody has said that to you, or you have said that to somebody else, what do you mean by that? You'll notice that the next thing is exactly what they just said, only louder. In Western culture, what do you mean by that implies that it's the speaker's fault that you don't understand, that they didn't use the right words. And that's kind of offensive. However, tell me more implies that you're curious to learn more. And so tell me more always causes them to produce new information, take us down other trails that ultimately leads in more clarity. What do you mean? Just pisses them off and you don't have clarity. Tell me more leads to new information and more clarity. And I wish everybody was using that phrase. So kudos there. Tell me more.
What about, just real quick too, what, and this is like a 10-second answer, like lightning, but I'm curious. I'm a big fan of not using the word why and using tell me more, because from what I understand, using the word why psychologically, subconsciously puts people on the defense. Be like, hey, why do you feel that way? Or versus like, hey, tell me more about that.
Yes. Why implies that because you don't understand why, there's something wrong with their why, which is going to cause them to make up stuff that they wouldn't normally make up because they're having to protect that there's something wrong with my why. Tell me more is like, ooh, this is exciting. I'm curious. Give me more details. So I would agree with the why. In the grade shift, there's a couple things at play. Between 11 and 13, that's the first time that the brain notices that it has a different experience, a different worldview than the parents do. Up until that time, they're kind of interlaced, and the parents' thoughts and opinions and worldviews are kind of intertwined with theirs. But around 11 to 13, their conscience starts to break away and form an independent identity. And this is what every parent should absolutely celebrate. The problem is most parents take that and interpret it as a threat, as disrespectful, when it's not. They're just forming their own ideals and opinions. We want that. We don't want mindless automatons. And so many parents confuse a different opinion from an attack on their authority. For example, I need you home at 10 o'clock. Oh, come on. My friends are staying out. Why can't I stay out till 11? This is not an attack on who gets to make the decision. It is not an attack on authority. It is a request to play a role in the decision-making process, which is a sign that they are coming as an independent identity being birthed into the world. We should celebrate that, not misconstrue it as, so that's one thing that's happening. I hear your kid is 13, this radical thing, it's never happened before. Where's it coming from? That is a factor in play, the factor that his identity is coming out. And how does he relate to himself compared to his super successful dad? How does he relate to himself compared to his other friends? And he's having to create that. It's being birthed. And for a little while, it's really messy. The second thing that's coming into play is there's three major bridges that we all cross. Between 3 and 5 years old, you have a crisis where you realize the world is a dangerous place. This is the first time that you notice, holy crap, you can really get messed up out there. Maybe you skinned your knee on your bike. Maybe you got knocked out. Maybe you saw your parents fight, but it was the first time that bubble was popped. And your brain had to figure out a way to make sense of the world. And so for some people, they're like, be funny. And they learned that if they could be funny, they could pull attention away from everybody else and control the situation. Other people were like, just say no. And they learned if they just told everybody no, regardless, that they could have some control. Between 11 and 13 is the second bridge that everyone crosses. In this bridge, it's the first time that you encounter a situation where you don't fit in. And in order to survive, to not be outside of the tribe, you have to invent a way to fit in so that you can be a part of some tribe. Now, if that tribe that you happen to fit in with is sports, what's the secret handshake to fit in with the sports tribe? Grades don't matter. If the tribe you happen to fit in with is theater, what's the secret handshake? Well, grades kind of matter. If it's music, grades kind of matter. They all have their own secret handshake. So that's another factor at play. I'm not saying it's right, wrong, good, bad. A small distinction that I might make is that it wasn't an artificial consequence. I say artificial. These are usually ones that parents make up for their own rules. It wasn't an artificial consequence. You weren't saying no friends. You were saying we can't use friends as an escape from doing your best. And you weren't saying your best has to be an A or a B. You're just saying you have to do something here. We can't use this as an escape. As long as this is happening, friend your face off. If it's not happening, then we can't friend. For me, I don't see that as and maybe consequence is just a semantic term. I don't see that as a consequence any more than I see if I don't work, I don't get to eat. Like I would see, for me, I would say like something ridiculous. Like if I don't work for a while, if I don't work for a week, then I get thrown in jail for 2 years. There's no relation, right?
Right.
I would see that as kind of a weird consequence than just practically how things work.
So this morning, I'm taking my 13-year-old. I want to share this because I love this comparison of consequences, right? And also sharing a lesson. So my 13-year-old was like, this is crazy. We love the school district that we're in. It's one of the top rated public school systems in my state. And there's something weird that's happening within the school that he's in. For some crazy reason, when assignments are due, you can turn them in late, and that's okay. And my wife and I are flabbergasted by this one because like the way that we grew up is like, you don't turn it in. If it's due Friday and it doesn't cross that teacher's desk, you got a 0.
That's right.
And there was no going back.
That's
but
right.
Like literally in this junior high school, it's the norm. They're like, oh, I didn't get it done. Can I get an extra day? Or can I get an extra couple days? Like this blows my mind. And teacher's like, oh yeah, no problem. And I'm like, and so I told my son this morning, I was like, hey, because I think what happened to him from what the details that he's told me, he just got distracted. It wasn't necessarily a big deal to the teachers. Well, now it's nearly the end of the quarter and now he can't make these assignments up. All of the teachers have told him, yeah, too much time has passed and now you can't. It's been 3.5 weeks. So I told him, I was like, listen, it might be okay to your teachers that you have missing assignments or you don't turn them in on the day they're due. That's not how we operate in our house. If you have an assignment due on Friday, whether your teacher says that that's okay, that you turn it in Monday, that doesn't pass the sniff test here. Because I told him, here's the thing, that I was like, Mason, that's not how the real world works, buddy. If I don't pay my taxes by April 15th and I don't file an extension or I just decide, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to pay him on May 15th. The government's going to find me. Be like, oh, okay, well, you didn't turn in on time. So there's a consequence. I was like, there was one time I forgot to pay a speeding ticket, right? You use that. It totally escaped my mind. And this was last year. So because the reason I slipped my mind was because my court date kept getting continued because of COVID.
Wow.
So like I was supposed to show up in court not that you're ever going to show up in court for a speeding ticket. I just pay the fine, right? They're like, hey, your court date is now this day. Don't worry about the fine. The court date is not, it got pushed for 6 months and it completely fell off my radar. And
Wow.
I was literally having lunch with a friend of mine who's an attorney. And you know how you have one of those light bulb moments where you panic because you realize it's like being in the shower and you're like, oh my God, I left the stove on or some crap, right? But I was sitting there and I was like, tell me about some of your craziest cases. And it hit me. I was like, oh my God, I forgot to pay that ticket. And then sure enough, I contact my brother who's an attorney. I'm like, dude, I forgot to pay this ticket. Will you? He's like, yeah, there's actually a warrant for your arrest. I was like, what? So
Wow.
yeah, he's like, don't worry, I'll make a phone call. He's like, it's fine. This happens all the time, especially with COVID. He's like, yeah, there's a warrant for your arrest right now. You get pulled over, you're going to jail. I'm like, oh my God. So I told my son this. I was like, listen, that's nobody's fault. That's me. That's my fault. I ain't blaming no cop. He pulls me over, arrests me. That's my fault. Like I didn't do what I said I was going to do. I missed the deadline. Got to pay the consequences. I was like, the fact that your teachers are not they're not ingraining this in you guys is disturbing to me because if you don't do your expense report on time in a corporation, that's not good. If you don't submit the reports that you have to do, or you own a business, you promise a customer something by Friday, it doesn't happen until the following Wednesday. Yeah, that ain't gonna fly, man. I was like, so that doesn't fly here. So do you think, because you and I were talking about, hey, society will take care of consequences or there's natural consequences out there. Do you think that there's some parts of society that they're like, oh, it's sunshine and rainbows and butterflies and unicorns. And like, it's okay. It's no turn in on Monday. It's fine. I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't buy into that. I think it teaches a terrible lesson. What do you think?
I think, unfortunately, that there are people like that that have found a way to go their whole life like that.
Yeah.
And for them, that is just their world.
Yeah.
I do think this brings up a really interesting point of real consequences and artificial consequences. Many times parents will discipline, air quotes, their kids. And the only real reason is because they're afraid of what other parents will think of them if they don't.
Ooh.
They
Yeah. Yeah.
personally
Okay.
are not worried about what the kid is doing.
Yeah.
They know it's not going to spill over into something. They're worried what other parents might think of them. That's the discipline of play. The
Huh.
second reason parents tend to discipline their kids is because they're afraid that their kid will continue down this road and it's going to lead to them being a mass serial killer. And that's going to look bad on the parents now, isn't it? So there we are back to concerned with how. And then the second one is even worse because it's like a perceived future imaginary threat. Neither one are what's happening in the present. This would be artificial consequences. And a weird illustration for this is sometimes people who are devoutly religious and they have strong religious beliefs and convictions and believe that their religion should be the only religion and it is the only way that humanity has access to moral standards, moral codes that we should live by. Until you ask them, what if one day you found out your religion wasn't true in a way that satisfied your specific needs and concerns to know that for whatever reason you were just led astray? What if you found out one day that it wasn't true? Would that change how you treat your spouse? Would you suddenly start sleeping around? Would you suddenly start beating your spouse? No, you wouldn't, because you don't want to get divorced. That's why. Would you suddenly start stealing and embezzling from your employer? No, you wouldn't, because you don't want to go to jail. That's why. Real world consequences versus artificial consequences. I think many times it's easy as parents to fall into the trap of, if I don't impose this artificial consequence, they are going to become beholden in life and constantly causing troubles and mess. Really? Are they though? I think they're motivated just like you to keep their job and pay their bills and not get divorced.
I kind of wonder if Ted Bundy's parents didn't punish him when he was killing cats and stuff like that. That's a fascinating question. I kind of wonder about that one.
Oh, that's a good example, because
Yeah.
there are people that biologically are missing
Right.
chemicals in their head.
Right. Right. Or you
Yes.
got Dahmer who eats people, that kind of thing, you know?
They are biologically,
Yeah.
yes.
This has been a fascinating conversation. I'm glad we had it, because I think what we did here is we struck a good balance between creating an environment of psychological safety and I mean, I still battle with this one. This one's hard for me. It's probably one of the hardest things that I do, and I explained to my son this morning. I was like, listen, I know you probably don't like the fact that you have uh you have now a higher you've got a higher level of structure in place based on some of the behaviors I've seen over the past 30 days. What I can tell you is that if your behavior changes, the structure goes back to the way it was, right? I was like, but there are times in our lives where we need to be tested, and not, that's the wrong word, tested, but where we just need a refresh on some of the priorities that are important, and maybe a tight container around making sure that those things are done. I was like, listen, and I'm fully aware that you probably don't enjoy this part. And I was like, and here's the secret that a lot of parents won't tell you. Neither do I. Fact. I kind of
Ain't
hated
that
it.
the truth?
Yeah. I was like, I told my son, I was like, listen, you inspire me, man. I was like, you make good grades without you hardly trying. You know, you are a good hearted, loving, affectionate young man who's very empathetic. You're a super competitive athlete. You know, like, you have so many amazing qualities that are going to take you so far in life. And I admire the heck out of you, and you inspire me to be better. And I'm also not here to be your friend all the time. I'm here as I'm your dad first and foremost. And you and I can hang out, we can have fun. But when I see a course correct that absolutely needs to happen, I'm gonna do it. You know, I will do it. I was like, I'm not here to always tell you the things that you want to hear. I'm not here to tell you to tell you that the world is filled with unicorns and sunshine and rainbows and you can turn in assignments late. That just doesn't fly in the real world. I was like, so I know you may or may not understand it now, and that is okay. But I'm doing you a huge injustice if some of these lessons aren't learned early on, right? I was like, but I think a lot of it, I didn't tell him this part, but I think a lot of it, your delivery with your son, right? My delivery with my son, I think if I remember growing up and how harsh things were delivered, to the point you felt defeated, condescended, invaluable, dumb, definitely didn't feel safe. But I think as parents, we can strike a good balance between all of those things, right? You don't have to mentally and verbally destroy your kids to teach a lesson. You know, you can, like you said, leverage the natural consequences, and yeah. But I've really enjoyed this. I want to make sure that the guys can find you where you're operating at, what you're doing. I know I've actually have taken your mind scan, which was absolutely fascinating. I appreciate you doing that, because I was like, oh wow, no, there's 46 years of data that I now understand why I was making the decisions I was. But yeah, I want to make sure the guys can find everything you're doing.
Yes, if you're interested in the thinking patterns of success, mindsetperformance.co. Don't take my word for it. Try it for yourself. See if the mind scan reveals something helpful for you.
We'll have your links in the show notes. We'll have that as well, so guys can contact you directly if they like. Gentlemen, for all the show notes, you can go to thedadedge.com/Friday24 for the show. Again, thedadedge.com/Friday24. So Jarrod, this has been great, man. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Gentlemen, go out, live legendary. Take care.